Welcome, everyone, to our latest NCAA social series. I'm Andy Katz, pleased to be joined by MAAC Commissioner Rich Ensor. That is a Division I conference based in New Jersey, but certainly up and down the Northeast quarter. And Rich, we want to dive into the subject because you guys made news this past week, potential trendsetters here, and other conferences have done something similar, but not to the extreme that the MAAC has done, which is pretty much lay it out that every student athlete needs to be vaccinated to participate in sports. We're seeing institutions that have gone and taken that step to, say every athlete has to be vaccinated, but at a conference level, we haven't seen that yet until the MAAC. If you can first, go into that decision process of how this came about, Rich.
All right. Well, first, thanks for having me on, Andy. As far as the process, we have had for over 2 years now a COVID working group made up of our health professionals and some administrators, and they have provided us with a lot of guidance throughout the COVID pandemic, and we rely on them heavily. But frankly, on this particular issue, this was a little bit more top down from presidents to the membership, and frankly reflects what our schools are all doing. So of the 11 MAAC members, and as you did say, we are basically in New York, Jersey, and Connecticut. We've had 10 of those member schools have this same policy for student athletes participating in the collegiate athletics this year. And frankly, and to a large extent, for the whole student body. So it was easy to get consensus on this because it reflected what the schools were individually doing, and we wanted to extend it to MAAC championship play. So that's basically how it developed. It took about 2 months of going back and forth with our membership, and particularly with our presidents. And as they solidified their fall semester policies for campus, we just drew off of that and built the MAAC policy.
So let me just dive a little bit deeper into that. So 10 of the 11, are you at liberty to say the one that didn't?
No, Canisius didn't want to do it full out. Obviously, they're going to have to live with the MAAC policy for conference play. But for a number of reasons, they chose to go with not requiring full vaccination of all their students.
And of the other 10, you say mostly, are all 10, or what's the number of how many of those 10 are saying for their entire student body, which is really a lot of schools, as you mentioned, in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, a lot of public and private have done that in those states.
Yeah, we're all private in the MAAC, but of the 10, 6 have a full policy of requiring vaccinations, 4 have varying degrees. And most of them are, I should say all of them, are living with the state requirements that there be certain exceptions. And the exceptions are typically for medical reasons or for religious reasons, but they're narrowly tailored. And the athletes have to go in and prove that they're either for religious reasons or medical reasons unable to participate in the vaccination program. And then they have a layer of requirements in order to participate in MAAC competition, including testing requirements every week and then masking requirements during competition. So very narrowly exceptions, but by and large, most of the 10 are requiring full vaccinations.
And so what we've seen already this summer, for example, your colleagues in the Colonial and the SEC have been pretty pretty direct in what they're saying about their fall football seasons. For example, in the Colonial, if you cannot field a team appropriately, and obviously in football that matters in terms of number of players at a certain position, you can't just not have any offensive linemen, for example, due to COVID, that if you can't play, it is a forfeit. SEC, same thing. And if neither team can play, then it becomes a no contest. Because what we saw a year ago, where everyone was sort of bending over backwards to make things happen, those that even played fall sports, extending the season out, rescheduling, all that, the sense is cannot do that anymore. And so I want to dive deeper back into that as a commissioner, to the point where you realize that what we went through last year obviously was out of necessity. It was pre-vaccine that we had to do this just to get through. But to go through another year of that kind of gymnastics to get a schedule in, the lost revenue, the lost time, the stress, all of that was almost untenable. From your vantage point as a commissioner, how did you view what had to happen to get a full season in?
Last year was very difficult, Andy. We literally redid our basketball schedule every week in order to accommodate those teams that were in COVID pauses. And it was a time-consuming process. And I have to give the athletes and coaches a lot of credit because they rolled with it, because they did want to compete and they knew that we were trying our best to make sure that that happened. This year, we're taking the same route as you mentioned with the football program in the Colonial SEC. Just yesterday, we announced that if a team cannot produce a competitive squad for competition purposes, that team will forfeit the game. And statistically, I don't think the NCAA is recognizing those. But for the MAAC internally, when we're choosing teams for postseason MAAC competition, we need to have a method of accounting for those forfeits. So they will count as losses. And as we pick 6 teams or 8 teams for a different competition, 8 in soccer, for instance, the 3 teams that aren't selected, if they may have well not been selected because they had a number of forfeits, we'll have to see. But it will be a factor moving forward. And frankly, I think the burden has shifted now from those that are vaccinated and trying to do the right thing, and then perhaps athletes that have chosen not to be vaccinated or programs that don't want to have their athletes vaccinated. I think generally society in this region of the country, at least, we're all viewing that as the burden of the unvaccinated. So we're not able to do those gyrations this year with scheduling. It just takes too much time and effort, and it's not fair to the teams that are vaccinated. I think we'll have some issues still in the fall because the Delta variant is certainly in the populace here in the Northeast. I had a staff member come down with it after being in Maine for a vacation recently, and she had to go through the quarantine process, and she's fine because she had been vaccinated previously, so it was very mild, the Delta variation. But we're going to see that this year, I think, still in the fall, and we'll just have to deal with it as we move forward.
So, but to that point that I was making, that because we have this tool, the vaccine, that the patients are sort of like at this point, look, we need to have athletic competition. We cannot financially go through what we went through last year, especially when we can avoid it. How much is that thinking within your league of basically you cannot go back, because if you do, it can be catastrophic? What do the numbers tell you about if you had to go back to what you went through a year ago?
Well, we've taken some big hits on our revenue flows, both from the NCAA revenue, as you're familiar with, and also our internal revenue sources. For a lot of reasons, we did a number of things related to our membership. We gave them a dues holiday last year, and we cut out certain other reimbursable expenses that we would normally receive from them. So. And then I also paid off the note on the building we own here, so I gave that money back. So my reserves are fairly low now. And last year's basketball championship, which usually is a net positive to me of about $400,000 or $500,000, was a negative $800,000 last year because we were doing testing every day of everybody involved. So it is a big economic hit, and that's why the vaccines are important and why we're going to require them this year. We can't really go through that another year. And frankly, it's not fair to the athletes that have been vaccinated. I recognize we're going to still have issues because of Delta, but hopefully they're minor in nature and we can contain it. But I don't think we're going to see what we went through last year, where we had wholesale schedule changes because teams weren't available for weeks at a time.
Well, and I mean, Iona went through almost months?
50 some odd days, I think it was. They were out of pocket from competition. It was ridiculous. And Rick Pitino did a great job. He went through and won the tournament. But we also want to make sure that as we go into the tournaments, field sizes are being developed based on, more head-to-head competition. Last year's seeding of the tournament was really something of just wasn't really what we would like to see, because there were just not enough head-to-head competition. So, it just came down to the numbers, and it worked fine for what it was. And it was great to see Iona do so well. But we certainly wanted to get back to a normal process as we head into the March Madness.
Let me go right ahead to the fall sports, because fall sports across the country, outside essentially of, scattering in the SEC, Big 12, and ACC, for the most part, at all levels, were canceled, shifted to the spring, or in some cases like the Ivy, not played at all, to ensure that those student athletes don't go through 2 years without competition, which would be absolutely disastrous, because you can't get it back. I mean, you can't get back 2 years. How critical was this decision and others that other commissioners are making to ensure that these fall sport athletes, from soccer to field hockey to cross country, get that opportunity this fall, especially when we have the tool of the vaccine?
Well, the MAAC is fully committed and to having a fall season, and that is why the vaccine requirement is in place. But I think every conference is trying to approach it in their region as best they can to provide that opportunity for the athletes this year. None of us want to repeat what happened last year. It was out of our control, and we did give them some sense of a season in the spring, but it wasn't the same as a full-blown fall semester season. So no, we're all committed and we're all working to get to that point. It's just that in different parts of the country, you have different politics laying in. We have an associate member, for instance, in rowing. We have two actually from Florida. Well, by state law, they can't mandate vaccines, which is fine. That's the state of Florida. And when they compete in Florida, they're going to have to meet that standard. But when they come to New Jersey in the spring, if the COVID is still where it is today, they're either going to have to be vaccinated or they won't be able to row with us. So it's just those kind of decisions that'll have to be made as people move forward this season.
Well, and Rich, look, it's not a right to participate. It's a privilege. And this is a conference that, as you mentioned, are private institutions that have every right to make this decision. I know we can't say it across the board, especially when you're dealing with different states and different state legislatures, and it's very difficult to get something blanket. But I'm just curious in your sort of thinking as you're working with presidents and athletic directors. It sounds like this was pretty unanimous to get to this point to make sure that there was a season in 21-22. How much pushback, if at all, if any, did you have?
Well, it's unanimous, but it took the better part of 2.5 months to build that vote to that point. As you know, commissioners were as much politicians as governors. We need to work with our membership, and we have 11 schools, and they all think they're in charge of me. So that's okay. That just goes with the territory. But and I've been doing it for 33 years, so I'm pretty good at maneuvering through that process. But yeah, it was fairly easy to get to a unanimous position. I am sure there are folks on campuses that would have liked to have done things a little differently here or there, but they react well to the fact that everybody's trying to make sure this season happens. And, we're all going to have to give a little in order to make sure that happens. So I can't say we've had huge pushback. I've got letters coming in from parents and other folks. And as you can imagine, you get probably a lot of that mail too. It's a little fringe in many cases, but we just recognize that's what's out there in the in the public right now. We'll have to deal with it as we move forward. But I think the parents generally understand we're trying to do the right thing for their athletes.
So that's on vaccination. In terms of masking, how much is that just going to be at the sort of the granular level that, each institution might have a different policy based on transmission rate in that particular community?
Well, first of all, the states are starting to get back into that space. So I think Connecticut passed a requirement that all indoor activities now have to have masks, whether you're vaccinated or not. So we'll have to work our way through that as we get into volleyball and then basketball to see what that means for competition purposes. But internally within the MAAC, we have requirements that if you aren't vaccinated and you're in one of those two exempted categories, that you either are tested 3 times a week by any test method and are negative and can then compete, Or if you go with the PCR test, you can go once a week and 72 hours before any competition, but you will have to be masked during the competition. I don't think we're going to have a lot of that. From what I'm hearing, there's 2 or 3 exemptions at most campuses at the high level. I haven't heard of astronomical numbers. One of our religious schools mentioned that a lot of young people were finding religion earlier this summer as they look to find an exemption, but they've got pretty rigorous standards they're applying to allowing that. So, and I think it'll work its way out.
There have been a couple things, and I think of recruiting, where use of Zoom has been actually a big plus during the pandemic, because you can actually do home visits a bunch in a day and never leave your office and visit with an AAU coach or, a parent or, just a whole group of people on one Zoom. And that could be something that stays. What are things that you've seen from the conference level, whether it's how you ran a championship, how things were conducted, even just, technology during the course of a game or a match, field, inside, outside, that you think they have a chance that might actually stay beyond this pandemic or even in this transition period?
Well, I think Zoom has certainly changed a lot of behaviors, both in athletics and in the general business world. I think we'll see Zoom be maintained as a method of having more frequent meetings on any number within any number of groups, but you can't beat the in-person eye contact and back-to-back conversations that take place. So I think it'll be a balancing act to see where that lands as far as what I do every day. As far as recruiting, I'm on that women's basketball oversight committee, and they have a recruiting proposal that's going to be working its way through the system this year that tries to incorporate a lot of what they learned the last 2 years as far as recruiting by distance and other elements of, and they're trying to maintain a home life work balance, if you will. And that's very important to many of our women's coaches. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses through the NCAA governance system. But I think those are the types of things that you'll see kind of creep into what was previously an in-person world of recruiting.
And lastly, Rich, I just want to go back to the cost so people fully grasp that, how expensive last year was versus if we can get to that point where a very small minority would be, subject to the testing, and also subject to any kind of distancing that was created in terms of, one group in, one group out, all these kinds of things. As I say, the sort of the gymnastics of COVID, that there was a cost to a lot of it, and all of it's not going to go away, but a lot of it could go away. If you could just give us a sense of what you heard from your membership about how much they took on and how much they need to sort of get off the books to at least get to a better place financially.
Well, they spent millions on testing and other kinds of accommodations for athletic competition and just student bodies in general. But in the athletic world, I can speak specifically for basketball, where we had our men's and women's tournaments together. We always do in Atlantic City, and we had 21 teams because Canisius had dropped out on the women's side earlier in the year. But that testing of all those teams daily, as well as all the staff and personnel, the game officials, the broadcasting teams, the whole shebang, that costs upwards to $540,000 for the MAAC for that one event. And we had to do that for any number of events. Golf at Disney. We had our volleyball up at the Albany Convention Center, which we've rented because of COVID, and had it attached to a hotel where there was a bubble-like environment. No, it added up to millions, even within the MAAC. And it's just something that we can't afford to do every year. We're a mid-major. We don't have those huge revenue streams that some of the majors have. And we do need to get the ship righted. So I think the vaccination policy is a step in that direction.
Well, Rich, you guys are trendsetters here. I mean, I'm hoping that other conferences are going to get on board here with this. And ultimately, they may have to avoid forfeitures and disruptions into their seasons. Be well, be safe. And as always, you can go to ncaa.org/social series, where we have all of our social series archived. We've been on top of this subject from day one. You can learn a lot. We've had some tremendous guests across the spectrum in the medical field, the athletic field, across everything in a variety of topics. Appreciate everyone. We will talk again next week. Stay safe, get vaccinated, and hopefully we're going to have a great fall across all divisions 1, 2, and 3 in the NCAA.